Hello and welcome. I'm Dennis Lyons, editor of the Daily Item, and we're here for another one of our ongoing conversations with the candidates for public office in the November 6th election. Our guest this time is Congressman Tom Marino, who is running for re-election, and his opponent is Democratic Mark Friedenberg, who we've had in earlier. Welcome, Congressman.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Nice to be here with you. I want to talk a little bit at first about what I consider sort of an interesting dichotomy. You've got an economy that's just going gangbusters. Yeah. You've got, I guess, one of the lowest unemployment rates we've had in a long, long time. Yeah. And on the other hand, I'm reading in the last couple of days that the deficit is up 17% and the national debt is at World War II, post-World War II levels. Mm-hmm. Should the voters be concerned about that, even though they know the economy is going well?
Well, I guess a question for you is, what sources are you getting the information on the deficit and
Congressional Budget Office
and the debt? So because we got to make sure of the sources, right, because I heard them way out of line. But yeah, the debt is going up, and the debt will continue to go up. But within a short period of time, you're going to see that coming down. I think we're headed toward a surplus and not a deficit. Don't forget, we're talking about coming into almost 2 years ago, a $20 trillion debt. And people have to realize the debt is an accumulation of decades, and the deficit goes from year to year. So I equate the economy, as you so eloquently stated, that it is booming. But we're not going to get to that debt and have a surplus until we start getting more revenues coming in, as we are. So it's like a mortgage on a house. I want to pay my mortgage off, but I don't have the money to do that. So what I do is I start budgeting myself and cutting back spending elsewhere. And then that savings that I make, I put towards the principal of my house. So my interest rate comes down, and then therefore I will pay my house off faster, and it will cost me less interest. So it's natural. I have enough economics in my background from college to make me dangerous, but the deficit and debt aren't going to stop immediately. First of all, it's going to take us, if we do it right, a decade, probably two, to get the debt down. We're just not going to be able to pay $21 or $22 trillion of debt off in a year's time, and in 5 years or either 10 years. But we will see the deficit start to disappear, so we have a surplus, so we can start bringing that debt down. So I feel confident that we're going to see that we will have a surplus, and that we can start bringing that, paying that debt off.
So where are those spending cuts to help us pay off that mortgage coming from?
Well, we don't want to necessarily look at all the spending cuts are going to do this completely. A lot that has a positive impact on this are people working. More people paying taxes, more manufacturing taking place in the country. I just read something that I got that we don't have enough people to fill the jobs that are available out there, and so that's a great indicator. Unemployment I think is about 3.7, and the sad thing about that is when you get down to that low, a lot of it has to do with people that cannot work or people who do not want to work. So I think we're well on our way. I'm proud to be to vote for the tax cuts, both for corporations and individuals. The jobs that are created, we have automobile manufacturers that are producing more here in the U.S. and more businesses are moving back.
Well, the CBO did say, I was reading a Wall Street Journal this morning saying that they did ascribe a lot of the corporate tax cut as kind of negating the revenue enhancement that was coming in.
I don't see that. If if the CBO, the problem with that is they are stagnant. They don't base anything on the dynamics of the government. So they're looking at things right now in the debt and not taking into consideration the future jobs that are being created, the future manufacturing that's taking place in this country. That's a problem. I've always had a problem with CBO scoring. It's too static, and it's what's happening right now, not taking into consideration what we have been seeing taking place over the past 2 years: job creation, stock market going up, portfolios doing much better, higher paychecks for people that in the workforce, corporations able to become more competitive because we were the highest corporate tax in the world. And the guy that I followed, unfortunately, God rest his soul, Charles Krauthammer's not with us anymore, but he's the guy that had it on. But Mr. Payne from Fox Business is very sharp on these issues, and he was just talking about that the other day. We need to look at the robust economy from a dynamic standpoint.
So I was listening to an interview with Senator McConnell this morning, and he said that once the midterms were over and such, we need to, quote unquote, get serious about the entitlements, the Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. And I wasn't able to really get the gist of what specifically he might be talking about. When we talk about getting serious with those, what do you think is entailed in that? Well,
I don't know what's going through his mind, because I've been serious about it from day one. And what, first of all, we need to do on the entitlements on Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, is particularly on Social Security. Those that are collecting Social Security now will continue to get it. They paid into it, they deserve it. Those that are about ready to retire, those in their 50s, and I'm even going back to people in their 40s. But usually when you hit 50 years old, 55, you start thinking about retiring, and you plan. So we made a promise to these people over the years: this is what your retirement's going to be like if you continue to work and pay into it. There's no way that I would support, and no one that I know, at least in the Republican House or the Senate, and even some of my Democrat friends, we're not pulling the rug out under from these people who deserved to be paid. I know there are people like Nancy Pelosi and Schumer are out there saying, we're going to cut your Social Security. Well, that's just, when you don't have the facts, you start making stuff up. But we do have to start looking at people, telling people in their 20s and 30s that we have to make changes. Perhaps those changes might be increasing the age before retirement. We may have to, which I'm a supporter of this to a certain degree, allow people to take a small portion, and invest. Not a major portion of the Social Security, because I think of that as a lockbox in the levels of payment into it. So it's something we have the talent to do it. Mm-hmm. It's just that both sides over the decades, they don't want to touch it. Because one side or the other, whoever's in power, the other side is going to say, oh, they're going to take away your Social Security.
As a New York City kid, it's a third rail issue.
Yeah, exactly. So we will make the changes that are there to preserve. But once again, I have to go back to the jobs. The more jobs that are created, the more pay increases, the more manufacturing in this country, that's really going to help fortify the Social Security.
Healthcare. One of the, well, let's eat this elephant one bite at a time. The concern over pre-existing condition coverage. I know, obviously, the Congress voted to overturn the Affordable Care Act multiple times.
Almost 50 times.
Right. And then we have this lawsuit going on in Texas. Yeah. Should anyone be concerned about losing their ability to have pre-existing conditions covered?
No. I will not support that. There's no talk in the House about it. Again, I think that's just another scare tactic. And I'll tell you, for many reasons, but my daughter has a pre-existing condition. You know it. We've talked about this before.
Yeah.
No one, I don't care. Politics has nothing to do with this. Race has nothing to do with this. If a person is born with a pre-existing condition, it's not that person's fault. And we have a responsibility to take care of people who number one, can't afford to take care of themselves, but number two, it would be outrageous. I would be the banshee leading the march on not eliminating the coverage of people who have pre-existing conditions. That's in stone with me.
Great. So now, one of the things that was at the top of every presidential candidate's to-do list at the beginning of the campaign last time was getting the changes made that needed to be made for the Affordable Care Act, or just getting rid of it entirely.
Yeah.
And little by little, through various means, many of the elements of that have been pushed aside, if you will. But there's not been a cohesive replacement. Is there something that is in the works? Is there a comprehensive replacement to handle health care for the masses that's coming forward after the midterms?
There is, and we've been working at it. There are two plans, and I think we need a hybrid. First of all, I don't use the word comprehensive. As far as I didn't agree with Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, whatever you want to call it, the way it was done, the way it was handled. But I do have to come back and say, no one has addressed it before Obama. I think that they went about it wrong. It's not something that in one fell swoop or 2,800 pages that you can deal with. We need to take it a step at a time, and we're not really getting rid of the Affordable Care Act. We're fixing it. We're fixing it through examples whereby the individual mandate no longer exists for people who, first of all, don't have the money or don't want to be involved in this.
And that's sort of the basis of this lawsuit.
Yes, it is. Other aspects of it are we are improvising. Some good ideas are coming out of there, and I can talk a little bit about these ideas. We know Obamacare didn't do what it said it was going to do. It was supposed to cover initially 50 or 60 million people for $900 billion and some change over 10 years. Once again, the numbers that came out, and I made sure I got these numbers when Obama left office to where we are now, it only covers about 22 million, and I've seen numbers as low as 12 million people for a cost of $2 to $2.4 trillion. We cannot do that. We cannot afford that. So we take it in sections. One of the things that we are looking at is allowing people to go over cross state lines to get health insurance. Now, that's not the panacea. That's going to bring down the cost of health care because of competition with healthcare systems to a certain degree. We also have to make sure that people are aware of what their cost is going to be, not only when they go to the doctors, but primarily when they go into the hospital. You go into the hospital, and unless it's an emergency, there should be time where someone sits down with you and say, you're in for this particular test, or you're in for this reason, and here's what we're going to do. And we want to show you what the costs are. There are costs that one does not know, even if a hospital goes through that. And that's the difference with health insurance, if it's a profit or a nonprofit system. Nonprofits are a little better advantage. They cover more territory, more people are in it. They don't have the tax issues that profits have to deal with. But let me give you an example. I go into the hospital and I need some surgery. And I know up front what my coverage is. I ask some questions. People have to start learning to ask questions, but hospitals have to take the ball and run with this and tell someone, this is what estimated we think your costs are going to be. And then when it's all over, boom, I get a bill, and there's about $3,000 or $5,000 added to that. Well, that isn't our cost. That is the cost, and I'm just using this for an example. I'm not targeting them. Anesthesiologist. An anesthesiologist may not be part of and hired as a person that is employed by the hospital. So that's a hidden cost that I didn't know about. If I knew about that, I said, wait a minute, I might want to shop around for an anesthesiologist. But you know the one fix to that, anybody providing a healthcare service in the hospital should be in the hospital's program, and then all that information is right up front. That's a key there. Another aspect of insurance, in addition to going across the state line and buying it, if you're employed and your company has a health care program, or even if it doesn't have a health care program, maybe I think this would be enticing to businesses, startups, that in order to cover some of that unexpected health care, I have been talking to a couple of my colleagues, particularly those that are much more better versed in it than I am, because they're physicians, they're insurance people, they're hospital people. Why not allow the employer to give the employee, let's pick a number, $5,000. And that $5,000 is to be used for unexpected medical expenses that inevitably pop up here and there in a healthcare plan. Then that employer get a tax exemption for that benefit that they're providing to the employee. That's going to help bring down the cost of healthcare, plus it's going to be, actually, all said and done, when you have the package, it's going to be less of an expense to the employer. I mean, there are multiple ways we can work these things out, and I'm looking at some notes. One of what I just talked about is called an HRA, a company that can fund that health care for people who get particularly Medicare, but also Medicaid. So it helps cover that expense so the hospital doesn't get zinged with that as well.
So do you see a dedication, a commitment to getting this done in the coming Congress?
Yeah, I do, because don't forget, when I ran in 2010, one of my missions and promises was we've got to fix this Obamacare fiasco and make affordable health care for people in this country. And again, getting back, there are those that cannot afford it, and then we have to help take care of those people.
So I can expect in 2019 this is going to be a priority in Congress.
Well, I'm going to be pushing it and screaming it at the top of my lungs. But believe me, some of the things that we've done already, as I said, getting rid of the individual mandate, getting rid of the tax on medical devices. I have 2 shoulder replacements. So the Obama administration put a tax on that device that I had to pay for to help pay for Obamacare, which didn't work. That tax is gone. So we have eliminated that as well. And we also have to make sure that we utilize more so what I call the emergent care concept. Instead of everybody piling into the emergency room, and most of those individuals are people who cannot afford health care, or are the ones on Medicaid, it's covered. We cover that through tax anyhow. But we should have more emergent care where we don't have to have an emergency room full of physicians where we have qualified nurses and physician's assistants who can do the routine tests, make the examinations, and determine whether a person has to go into the emergency room to see a physician or a specialist.
Okay. Rick?
Okay, I mean, there are so many things to talk about.
There are.
I think I wanted to touch on something that's in the news right now, and that's the Saudi situation.
Yeah.
What do we do about it? I mean, is the president taking the right track on this? What are your thoughts? You have a lot of foreign committee work.
Yeah, I'm on foreign affairs and NATO. Just got back from a major NATO trip. Talked about many issues even additional ones that you're talking about. But I'm glad that the president is taking a tough stance on this to get to the bottom of it. If the Saudis are responsible, there has to be something done on the part of not only the United States, but other countries, sanctions of some type. This concept of, well, I don't like someone or they make me look bad, let's get rid of them. No, that's not the way we operate, and we're going to make sure that those countries that think they can operate like that aren't going to get away with this scot-free. There's still a lot of questions to be answered. Still a lot of investigation taking place in cooperation with our European allies. So we will get to the bottom of this.
Have you ever met the Crown Prince?
Once.
What do you think?
Well, I wasn't quite sure who the Crown Prince was at that point because it was a group of people until I realized he wasn't in there and the Crown Prince walked in. And then immediately I knew who the Crown Prince was. But it's a very, how can I say it? It's a very unique, interesting society. Not that I agree with everything that they believe in or everything they do, but it's just, it really broadened my horizons on how different these countries are compared to the United States.
Bill, I'd like to follow up on the Saudi reaction, especially from the president, where you said you're glad the president's taking a tough stance on them.
Yeah.
He sort of, I don't want to say gave him a pass, but he said, he said that could have been a road killer or something like that. When you want to see a tough stance, is that the kind of language you want to hear from him in this case?
Bill, I can sit here and take the tough stance because I'm not the president of the United States. But the president of the United States, he has a fine line to walk. And he's got to make sure that there's that old saying, keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. So there are times when you really don't want to become the antagonist, but I know, but not as much as the White House knows, but more than we in this room know, what's taking place on investigations like this. So a lot of that has to do with political posturing.
Okay. I don't know if you want me to keep going.
Yeah, sure.
Sort of shift over a little bit into jobs. Your opponent supports a $15 federal minimum wage.
Of course, he's a socialist.
Is there anything that can be done to the minimum wage? I mean, it's a $7.25 nationally. It's a $7.25 in Pennsylvania. It's not a real living wage for families.
Listen, we're doing it. The more jobs we create, the more better paying jobs we create, those minimum wage jobs are going to have to increase if people want to keep their businesses going. So that's the way to do it.
Yeah, Congress, just to follow up on that, we're doing a survey about what's important to our readership area. Different issues, and we'll be covering issue by issue. Obviously, one is jobs. You go down the streets, you see help wanted, help wanted, help wanted, but they're not family-sustaining jobs. How do we get to the point where we bring in jobs where people can actually make a living and not have to do 2 or 3 jobs?
Well, we've done that. Lowering the corporate tax in and of itself. I hear from small businesses on a regular basis, I was going to go out of business. Now I have more money in my pocket. I can expand my business. I can increase wages. I can develop more products. The more we get regulations out of the way of business, we're going to see more jobs come in there, more higher paying jobs. But don't forget, we're talking about 80% of the jobs, roughly, in this country are small business. Okay, small business does not run on doesn't have a wide margin like major corporations do. So when we talk about raising when my opponent talks about raising the minimum wage up to $15, does he have any concept of what that does to the economy? What that does in a pizza shop? Now the price of pizza goes up. Okay, now the price of, since the price of pizza goes up, the family who's going to live on that pizza maybe have the luxury of ordering it out once or twice a week. That cost is going to go up. So let the market determine, not some arbitrary figure that, I wonder, has anybody out there, particularly from the social side, really know what it's like to run a business? Does my opponent know what it's like to run a business? Does my opponent know what it's like to get dirt under your fingernails and sweat like I did? I started working in a factory when I was 17, sweeping floors, worked my way up to mid-level management, and running a company and supervising people. So I know what it's like out there. Came from a poor family. But for someone just to sit back and say, your business should pay this, has no sense of reality.
So should there not be a minimum wage?
There is a minimum wage.
Should there not be one?
I'm not saying there should not be. I'm just saying not take this minimum wage away because it's going to go up based on the jobs that are being created. It's established, and again, I'm not pulling the rug out from anybody else on something that's established. I would not say to someone, well, you're making minimum wage now, but since it's unfortunate that you're living on that, but you're going to have to learn to live on less, so I'll pull the rug out from under you. No, that's absurd.
Okay, but I'm sorry, because it sounded like you don't want the a wage kind of indiscriminately set that a small businessman has to pay his employee, but there already is one.
Right.
So you're just saying you shouldn't increase it.
No, I'm not saying you shouldn't increase it. I'm saying let the market increase. Let the market force it to be increased. It's not for me to say, okay, I want to stop the minimum wage. That was set out there. That was promised. That's what we have to follow through on.
Okay. Let's talk about immigration. We have a number of factors on that front, but why don't we start with, it looked like some situation where maybe the Dreamers, the DACA thing could have been resolved. It seems to be off the table at the moment. Where are we going with that?
Well, it's off the table because Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats do not want to talk about this. It's all or nothing. Nancy Pelosi wants she wants the borders wide open. Anybody can come in. She's all for sanctuary cities. Let the criminals hide there. But do you ever see where she lives? And do you ever see the giant wall around her house? And do you ever see the security that hangs around her? She doesn't have to worry about things like that. Okay? So what we need to do is build the wall and make sure that I'm second generation Italian American. My family came over here the legal way. That's the way we run the process.
And by a wall, you're not necessarily talking about brick and mortar, right? We're talking about various ways.
Yeah, there's various ways.
Yeah.
Look, actually, when people say brick and mortar, it's not going to be brick and mortar. There's going to be high-tech fencing certain areas. There are natural obstacles that, boy, unless you're very, very experienced in climbing straight up 1,000 feet, you're not going to get in. Drones. Electronic devices, lasers, infrared, and also more security on the border, and working more so with Mexico. But I've been down to Mexico a couple times on Codel's and talking to the leadership. A problem that Mexico has is, now some of Mexico's people are coming into the country, most illegally, some illegally, but a lot of it's coming from the countries south of Mexico, where Mexico gets flooded with immigrants leaving the countries below Mexico, and then Mexico just helps shovel them into the U.S. Mm-hmm. So Mexico's got to get serious about this too. And as the president said, maybe Mexico should think about on their southern border doing something to at least mitigate those people coming into his country.
But you do think something needs to be done with the so-called dreamers, the people who were brought here as young, very young children and have grown up here.
Yes. I do.
And
Because you know something? I see those kids all the time. There's one of my best friends in Congress is Karen Bass. She's a Democrat from California. In fact, she was the first female African-American Speaker of the House of the House in California. And she and I chair the foster care adoption caucus. And we go around to countries and the states and see foster care operations, see how they're run. We do a lot of legislation concerning foster care. And there's a fair number of kids that come into this country that are in foster care that weren't born here or came ahead of their parents. And listen, my kids are adopted. My wife and I have had a foster son. I was a big brother. The kids should not suffer because of the sins of the father. And there's a way that we can work this out. It gets complicated. We don't have enough time to explain it here today, but if the parent is here illegally, but they're not a threat, there are aspects that we can, laws that we can incorporate into. You may never be able to become a full-fledged citizen. You may not be able to vote, but you could be a permanent resident here as long as you contribute to society. We get you a job. You help take care of your family.
Is that legislation that's in committee now?
We're talking about it. We're talking about it to a certain extent in judiciary, where we have one of the committees I'm on. We have a great deal of jurisdiction over that.
Sort of along the lines of immigration, we've talked previously about sort of visa loopholes and things like that. Is there anything legislatively being done to sort of correct that process or maybe narrow it down a little bit?
Sure, because out of half of the numbers for illegals in the country I've seen range from 11 million to 22 million. I don't know how those numbers, how they come up with those numbers, but it is a fact that half of those numbers are due to people who their visas expire and they don't renew them or they just drift off. We need to have more people keeping track of those visas. We need to have immigrations have the staff and personnel, the computer technology to find out and know where those people are. And when their visa expires and they do not come in to refile, or we know they haven't left, then we have to go looking for those people. And they abused the process. They were allowed to be in this country, and without a legitimate, they don't have an extreme legitimate reason, then they should be deported. And that's going to take care of a great number of those illegals.
Okay. Senator Toomey's been pretty vocal about how some of the tariffs that have been imposed are hurting farmers right here in Pennsylvania and elsewhere. What is your view on the tariffs, and do you think where do you think that's going?
Well, the tariffs are working. Look, with the European Union has come to the table to talk about new trade agreements. Mexico, we worked out a deal with them. We're working out a deal with Canada. We have to concentrate on China. But NAFTA was a disaster. I do not agree with multilateral treaties. Why should 16 countries get together and try to come up with a treaty with the United States? Because all 16 of those countries have something different that they have in mind to increase trade, and we suffer from it. I am not for free trade. I am for fair trade. And I get a chuckle out of what Senator... Who'd you say it was? Senator Casey?
Well, actually, I said Senator Toomey.
Senator Toomey?
A Republican. He'd been pretty vocal about how he felt it was hurting some Pennsylvania farmers.
Well, tariffs have hurt to a small degree the farming industry, but not to the extent that I just left a big meeting with Farm Bureau. In fact, I was there, they gave me an award, but because of how much I support the farmers, I live in the middle of 5 farmers. But I was explaining what the tariffs have been doing and how it will actually increase yield for farmers and increase milk production if we start doing more powdered milk and sending it and exporting it. And the farmers have told me that, I've asked them, what have the tariffs done to you? And I haven't heard all but one or two people who were complaining about milk prices say it has hurt them. Here's something that we have to watch out for: the tariffs. And I've been thinking about this for a couple of months now, and just yesterday I was visiting a steel plant, and they brought something to my attention on the tariffs that I had in the back of my mind, and I want to start having some hearings on this. Prices of some, could be agricultural goods, it could be steel, have gone up here in the United States. But there are indications it's not because of the tariffs. It's because right here in the United States, some producers have been taking advantage of the fact that, well, there's going to be a tariff, and the tariff went up X amount, cost X amount of problems, so we will inflate our prices, and they could be generating more of a profit. That's something that I'm going to look into when I get back to D.C., given the fact that I am chairman of the Regulatory Reform and Antitrust Committee. So if there are prices being artificially inflated by some businesses here in the United States, based on the fact that we have tariffs with certain countries, and that cost is not going up to causing that manufacturer to increase prices legitimately, we're going to find out about it.
Okay, you're campaigning in a slightly different geographic district.
Yes.
Has that had any impact on anything?
My district is 25% new. I went all the way to the east to New York and New Jersey. And I no longer have Pike, Wayne, and Monroe. But then I moved west, and now I have Potter, Adjimie, Center, Clinton, and I have Lycoming County back that I had in my first term, and then now just got that back. So we're campaigning there extensively, so people know who I am, know what I stand for, know what my platform is. And I have a platform. My opponent doesn't. My opponent just says, give everybody a $15 raise and everybody should have health care. Well, my platform is I'm a fiscal conservative, I'm pro-life, I'm pro-Second Amendment, I'm for border security, I'm for lowering taxes, I'm for creating jobs, I'm for getting rid of job-crushing regulations in this country that were putting businesses out of business. I'm for a strong military. I'm proud that we fund the military so they can buy the equipment that they need. I'm proud that we're taking care of our veterans the way they should have been taken care of, and for protecting Social Security and Medicare and even Medicaid for the people of this country. That's my platform. I'm a constitutionalist. The less federal government in my life, the better. I'm a states' rights guy, and we should get rid of 50% of the federal government.
Okay, well, that sounds like a fair place to wrap up. I appreciate you coming in and taking the time with us.
It's always a pleasure.
We'll do this again. Thank you.
You bet, anytime.